Greetings, loyal listeners and new recruits. I'm Drew Deach.
I'm Travis Newton.
And this is GenreVision. Every week, Travis and I review and recommend horror films, action movies, fantasy flicks, sci-fi cinema, and more. This week, we're continuing our kind of steady quest to watch all of the big, or I would at least say notable fantasy movies of the 1980s with Dragonslayer. We also think now that it's been a couple weeks after Game of Thrones has ended, it might be appropriate to look at a dragon movie. But speaking of Game of Thrones, we want to tell everybody that we have an exclusive episode up on our YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/GenreVision. You can also go to GenreVision.com and there's a post on the page there. The intention was to talk about the finale of Game of Thrones, but it kind of ballooned up from that topic.
Yeah, we end up talking a lot more about fan culture and a whole bunch of other related topics. So, yeah, please check that out.
Well, talking about fan culture, that brings to mind one of the questions we got submitted for our Q&A episode coming up in July. We want to remind everybody that we still need more Qs to A. Go to GenreVision.com. There's a post on our page there that you can use to submit questions for the Q&A, or you can press contact on GenreVision.com and send your questions in that way. We have been asking for them pretty steadily, and we've continued to get some, but we could still use some more.
We could still use a bunch more, frankly. Come on, guys. Let's get them in. Do it.
It's an Ask Us Anything, so it can be about anything.
Literally anything.
Yes. Don't feel limited by, the
reality or attacked or...
or anything. So please submit those questions. And last but not least, wanted to let everybody know that a new episode of Third Time's the Charm, the podcast I do with Danielle Ryan about third movies and film franchises, we have a new episode out on Pirates of the Caribbean at World's End. Strangely, it ended up being our longest episode to date, which we did not plan.
Makes sense, because that movie is approximately 6 movies long.
That's a good point. So there's just a whole bunch to discuss. And it was the first time I'd ever seen that movie. So I think it was, there was a lot being processed, but I think it turned out to be a really good episode. And I think we can dive in to Dragonslayer. Now, Dragonslayer is one of those movies that I've always heard about. I didn't see it as a kid. It wasn't really on my radar during formative years of my film watching, but it was always something I kind of heard about or saw referenced in any kind of film documentary or anything that talked about effects work. And I think Dragonslayer returned to the conversation during the first season of Game of Thrones, because Game of Thrones name dropped the dragon from Dragonslayer, whose name is Vermithrax Pejorative. I'm going to talk about that name a little later, but they use the name Vermithrax in the first season of Game of Thrones. And everyone was like, hey, it's a cool little nod to Dragonslayer. And now this is the second time I've seen Dragonslayer in my life. I eventually saw it many years later. And seeing Dragonslayer now, it's impossible not to see this as a huge inspiration to George R.R. Martin and the showrunners of the Game of Thrones television show. This feels kind of like Game of Thrones in a petri dish.
Yeah, it is very proto Game of Thrones in a lot of ways, but it's also pretty samey with a lot of other 80s fantasy, high fantasy films. It feels very adjacent to Excalibur. It feels very adjacent to Krull in a lot of ways. And we'll get there a little bit later as far as comparisons to other media and just how closely it tracks, but it's familiar. It's definitely a familiar movie if you know the genre and you've never seen this before. I think this is the third time I've seen this movie. I think I saw it when I was in college once because it had been recommended to me. And then I think I saw it a few years ago and didn't remember it too well. So this is definitely the time that I, sat down and really wanted to appreciate this for all that it is. And I was impressed with Dragonslayer in a lot of ways.
I was too. There is a lot about this movie that I found both impressive and incredibly aspirational in terms of what it wanted to do with fantasy. I mean, for some context, I think people have to remember, post Star Wars, fantasy kind of got a shot in the arm because this was clearly a genre that people would go see. Between Star Wars and stuff like Conan the Barbarian, it was a revitalization and kind of the first time that this approach to fantasy felt like it could be done authentically enough, as opposed to older films that could only come across as cheesy or half-hearted. And Dragonslayer, I so love the desire behind it to be like, we are going to make what we believe could be the most grounded, believable approach to a very, maybe one of the oldest stories of all time, having somebody have to go kill a dragon in a cave.
Sure. Yeah, this is very much super mythological. It is archetypal characters and introduction of very, very, very simple sort of pagan mysticism and introduction of Christianity. It doesn't really do a whole lot that's real interesting with these things. They're all just sort of introduced as big blocky concepts in the movie. But, it's not a complex film. It's not even as complex as a story like Beowulf, for instance. It's just super simple, trying to be a crowd pleaser. And which is odd because if you want to make a crowd-pleasing movie, I don't see why you cast Peter MacNicol as your lead.
All right, so we're going to go right into that. I was going to save it. I was going to try and be really positive up front, but you called it out.
Well, clearly you're on the negative side as far as, what Peter MacNicol brings to the film.
I thought you were going to say I'm on the negative side of what Peter MacNicol is.
Well, I think that too, but I think the thing is, like, you recognize Peter MacNicol as sort of a funky character actor. Like, he's great in these little weird roles, like as bad as Ghostbusters 2 is sometimes, like, that character he plays, Janusz, is one of the more memorable things about Ghostbusters 2, and it's because Peter MacNicol plays the role as, like, so camp and arch and weird. Mm-hmm. And he's good at stuff like that. He's also a good voice actor.
Absolutely. I don't have a problem with him in terms of his character actor status, but this is such a weird thing to see him in because his character is the Luke Skywalker. He is the fresh-faced young apprentice character who is going to have to follow that Campbellian hero's journey, beat the dragon, and save the damsel in distress. So we think. I mean, we'll get to those changes, but Peter MacNicol, he's just a weird guy. He doesn't feel at all like the person you need to cast. Like, we were talking about this during our screenings, and I said you need like a Matthew Broderick, for this era, which of course he went and did a fantasy film later, Lady Hawk. You need somebody who feels genuinely boyish and spry and, somebody who's kind of halfway cherubic.
Maybe. But I mean, like, if that's going like with basic archetype, Peter MacNicol is a character actor. Like, he's a slightly odder choice. And I think it's interesting that the movie went with sort of a slightly atypical choice with Peter MacNicol. Like, that's an interesting approach instead of just finding a bland white, Mr. Wonderbread as your star of your movie. But Peter MacNicol is not the kind of character that this is. His character is named Galen, and just like you said, yes, he's a sorcerer's apprentice. He's an apprentice to the sorcerer Ulrich, who's played by Ralph Richardson, who you might recognize from Time Bandits. He plays the Supreme Being in Time Bandits. That was the movie he did right after Dragonslayer, actually. In the beginning of this movie, a group of citizens from a nearby kingdom come to the sorcerer Ulrich with a complaint. Hey, Ulrich, this dragon, it's really fucking us up, man. Our king has made a deal with the dragon, and on every equinox, the king sacrifices, I think, 2 virgins, 1 or 2 virgins every equinox to the dragon. And this keeps a peace. We have a truce with the dragon. Dragon doesn't burn our crops, doesn't murder a whole shitload of people, as long as the king selects 2 virgins every equinox, and, that's it. That's the deal. We think it sucks. We hate it. We want it to end. Please come kill the dragon, Mr. Sorcerer.
Yes, and I will say this first little act of the movie, it set me up for something that I thought I was really going to enjoy, because you kind of get the aesthetic that it's going for, the tone that it's going for. And I really, really like Ulrich. He is probably the most interesting character because, of course, he's a master magician and sorcerer. But I like how casual his use of magic is, and his understanding that it's also part of a show, that it is showmanship. It is not just kind of, what's his name? Nicole Williamson in Excalibur, who is the most wizardy wizard of all. Ulrich's kind of just a guy. I mean, a wise person and a true talented magician, but he's also kind of just a dude.
Yeah, he's just an old dude. He's a little bit quirky, but we don't really get to know him all that well. He's not in the movie for a long time. So one of the characters who comes to Ulrich begging for Ulrich to kill the dragon, because only a sorcerer can kill a dragon, is this kid named Valerian. And you will look at Valerian and you're like, well, character is clearly presenting as male, but it's very obviously played by a woman. And the woman's name is Caitlin Clark. And we think, okay, well, plenty of movies have cast adult women as like teenage boys. I mean, look at Mary Martin as Peter Pan. You know, this is sort of a time-old tradition.
I was just going to say, yeah, look at the entire legacy of the stage versions of Peter Pan.
Yeah, exactly. So Ulrich, he initially doesn't agree to go kill the dragon, but then he does agree to go kill the dragon, and he leaves Galen behind. You know, Galen, Peter McNichol's character, is kind of disappointed to be left behind. But who shows up before they all decide to leave and go kill the dragon but this asshole named Tyrion? It's not spelled the same way as it is in Game of Thrones.
Well, I was going to say also, if you're picking up on Tyrion and Valerian, again, I think George R.R. Martin might have stolen pretty liberally from this movie, but it's fine. Like I don't have a problem with that. It feels more like homage. But yes, Tyrion is sort of I don't know what his title is, head asshole of the King's Guard.
Yeah, he's the head evil wig wearer for the king.
That's a reference nobody's going to get unless they listen to the Pirates of the Caribbean episode. But yes, he's the head baddie, kind of in a more classical film terminology, he is the big henchman. You know, he's the odd job. He's the Jaws.
And what does he do?
Like he stabs Ulrich right in his chest in a very played out kind of. I don't think this scene really works, in which Ulrich's like, yeah, okay, you want to test my powers? Here, stab me with this knife and you won't kill me. And he stabs him and he kills him. It's like, oh. Yeah,
Ulrich just dies. He just dies right on the front lawn. But we know it's not, it's not Ulrich just dying, because like just before he dies, Galen sees like, oh no, they're going to stab this guy in the heart. And then all of the doors inside the castle where they've been living slam shut, trapping Galen inside. So Galen knows like, oh, this is some sort of ploy, like he's doing this intentionally, but still he doesn't want his master to die.
I mean, you know what scene this is.
Yeah, this is Obi-Wan Kenobi looking over at Luke and going, if you strike me down, I shall become more powerful than you can possibly imagine.
Exactly.
But it coming so early in the story feels a little unearned. So this really potentially interesting wizard character just fucking disappears from the movie at this point. Like, you're just like, okay. And so Galen, after Tyrion leaves and fucks off and goes back to the kingdom, Galen decides to tag along with this band of people who are pissed off about the dragon situation. He's like, yes, I am the sorcerer now. And for some bizarre reason, he's very, very confident. Like, there's not a single ounce of humility or like hesitation in this kid's vibe. Like, he's just like, yeah, I'm the sorcerer now. I'm going to rip your clothes off with magic and shit.
Yeah.
He does that to an old man, which...
It's the old man from Neverending Story.
That's right. That's right. Also, what else? What else has he been in?
Don't make me IMDb him.
Oh, sorry. Sidney Bromley is the name of the character. I'm on IMDb every episode, by the way.
The character is hot.
Oh, he plays one of the freaking bums in American Werewolf in London.
There you go.
He also plays a character named Diddler in a movie called Pirates from 1986.
Oh, okay. I thought you were talking about that Pirates porn movie.
No, Roman Polanski's Pirates.
So yeah, I mean, Galen's confidence, I feel, it's not set up properly, but it is set up somewhat with Ulrich trying to show him that, okay, you have to have a showmanship about you when you do this magician stuff. Like, you have to, because my favorite line of Ulrich's is when he's like, okay, you want to be a magician? Grab some of that sulfur powder there when he's going to present himself to the group of villagers. And so Galen can just throw the sulfur powder down and make an explosion. So when Ulrich walks out of a doorway, it's like, aha. I'm like, I like that.
Wants to make an entrance like a drag queen and shit. Boom, here I am, motherfuckers.
Exactly. And it's like, oh, okay. The theatricality of it is established. But yes, there isn't anything there. You know, there isn't Luke sitting down and playing with his little flyer thing, you know, like, oh, come on, I want to do this. And, you know I'm really good. I could blast womp rats and shit, whatever. That's not really well enough established, but it's clearly what the movie's kind of drawing upon.
Sure, but like this level of cockiness and confidence on a Peter McNichol character,
that's the real problem.
Yeah, that's where it like suddenly is like a mismatch where you're like, hold on, this kind of odd looking dude who is like perfect in the right roles is suddenly playing this like fuzzy headed cocky wizard. Like I don't get it. We shortly then find out that, yes, Valerian is indeed a woman because he gets a peek at her while she's bathing in a very clear pond. And he sees it all. And we see it all. A little Peter McNichol gets a little Peter McNaked.
Hey-oh. Well, this moment, because something that we didn't say is the entire deal with sacrificing the virgins to the dragons is done by a lottery. And Valerian states, it's like, oh, yeah, if you're rich, your name never goes into the lottery. Like specifically the name of the Princess Elspeth. It's like, yeah, her name's not ever thrown in there. And then when we realize like, oh, okay, Valerian has been masquerading as a boy pretty much from birth to avoid being selected by the lottery, I was like, hey, I like this class commentary.
Yes, it absolutely is a class commentary. It's a commentary about gender dynamics and sex dynamics, and it has some things to say. There's things on its mind. It actually starts to get into the politics of this kingdom, which is Erland. The fact that it has all this interesting stuff going on with the selection of the virgins, and then, of course, the king's daughter is not going to get selected because she's the king's daughter, and, of course, he's not going to kill his own daughter and sacrifice her to the dragon, blah, blah, blah. We do, however, see in this sort of first half of the movie a virgin selected and put out for the sacrifice for the dragon, and we get our first real looks at what the dragon looks like. We don't see the whole thing yet, but we're shown it in pieces. And boy, is this sequence one of the best in the film.
By far, Dragonslayer takes such a classic approach to revealing its monster. You show off parts of it before you really get the whole. And I love the shot selection. There's a great shot of the dragon's tail smashing this cart, and then this slow kind of pan over its tail as it drags it on the ground. And it's like, ooh, yeah, I'm building this thing up in my mind with the pieces you're giving me.
Well, there's like genuine horror and mystery built up as to how this thing looks and how this thing works, and you really get to feel like it is stalking its prey. And because they only show bits and pieces of it at a time, this being a restriction of the effects, it makes it feel like the dragon is too big to fit in a single shot in the film. It really makes the thing feel very, very imposing. There is a shot where its big foot, it almost looks like a chicken's foot, oddly enough. Its foot reaches out and impacts the ground, and it's this big articulated practical foot. And you look at it and you go, that's where Jurassic Park got the T-Rex foot shot from. Mm-hmm. That's the fucking, proto shot. In many ways, this is proto Game of Thrones, but it's also proto Jurassic Park.
Oh, yeah. I mean, obviously, Phil Tippett, who did some of the animation, which I'm sure we'll talk about later for this, who worked on Jurassic Park, I think they brought some of that idea of how you reveal a monster, because there's shots in Jurassic Park that remind me of Dragonslayer. Like during this, when we see a virgin torched, the shots behind the head of the dragon, like, and you just see the bat, you see some of its horns and its neck and stuff, but you never see the face at first. It's like, yeah, this is totally giving me that kind of T-Rex vibe. It's great. This entire sequence was, this was the point where I was like, am I going to love this movie? Because I'm loving this.
Yeah. This is really, I think, the fabric of the movie. Like, even though it is like a monster menacing a woman, it is inarguably some of the best filmmaking in the movie. Like, it's just like good horror, monster stuff. It's just so full of good energy and good editing and, excellent shot choice and also a good score. The music was nominated for an Oscar from this movie. The score's by Alex North, and it's very deserving of that Oscar nomination. It's a very good score.
It is. Yeah, I like the score. It wasn't like standout to me, but I was like, no, this is working. Like, this is selling me on the take that this movie's trying to do with fantasy.
Yeah, it's very openly like Wagnerian.
Yes.
Very openly classical, and I like that a lot. But it also really serves to like amplify those horror elements and things like that. It really is intense. So now that we're back with Galen and Valerian and their sort of king of their little band of Erlanders, they come upon the dragon's lair, and Galen, being the little cocky sorcerer that he is, closes the dragon's cave by causing a rock slide. He then claims to have killed the fucking dragon, Vermithrax Pejorative. This is a lie.
Well, okay. I was going to bring this up again, and since you said the name, Vermithrax. Vermithrax is an A+ dragon name. Mm-hmm. It's wonderful. Pejorative. Pejorative is a real word.
Yeah, it means bad word or like an insult.
Exactly. And I'm like, I don't think you needed that little add-on to it. Vermithrax is just fine by itself.
I don't know. I like that dragons have a last name. That's cute.
It can have a surname, but I don't know if its surname needed to be an actual real word. I don't know. Vermithrax Pejorative. It sounds weirder to me. But anyways.
The dragon itself, like the way that they build it up is not just through like good shots of it eating the virgin or whatever, but the way that they talk about it in the first act of the film, like the way that the sorcerer, old guy, Ulrich, the way he talks about it is like, this is a really old dragon, and when dragons get this old, they sort of get twisted and their scales grow all weird and they're in constant pain and they're just like full of hate and spite. And I'm like, this is cool. This is an interesting idea. I'm really into this, like this idea of this like painful, gnarled, twisted dragon. Like, that is scary. I like it.
Well, because it's enough to, I think, for most people just to, okay, this is a scary creature because we know it's a scary creature. But this kind of stuff makes Vermithrax a true antagonist by being a character. Mm-hmm. And we'll get to some more, because there was a surprise towards the end of the movie that I was like, oh, okay, now there's even more character being built into this dragon. So after everybody thinks that the dragon is dead, they have a big party. And Valerian decides to finally come out as a woman in the village, and they have a coming out dance with her. Like Galen, who is obviously, because this is this kind of story, fallen in love with Valerian. The whole village goes silent as she comes out, and then he takes her hand and they dance, and everybody finally starts dancing in along with them. And I liked this scene. It helps sell me a little bit on the emotionality of the movie, because I think that's a factor that's very lacking throughout the rest of it.
Yeah, well, it's a fairly short movie. Like, this movie never really drags, but it is definitely lacking in interesting character stuff. Most of the movie is concerned with sort of moving mechanics around in terms of the plot. And, the plot's not a drag, so the movie's never really that much of a drag.
No.
But it is fairly light on character. So after this party, I think Galen manages to talk to the king. They're talking about the lottery sort of being off now. And one of the funniest interactions of the movie happens here for me. Galen says, your children were dying. And of course the king goes, only a few. Like it was like a Monty Python line delivery. I laughed really hard. The king is like obviously played to be a super fool.
Well, I was going to say, I really, really like Peter
Eyre.
Peter Eyre as Cassiodorus Rex, the king. He's very haughty, and he's playing it kind of old school Shakespearean.
Oh, that big fake beard and the big chunky crown really make it.
Yeah, I like him a lot. He's kind of the perfect douchebag king. There's a couple other things that go on with the king being like, oh, we'll see if the dragon's actually really dead. Of course it's not. This is when the idea of the movie dissecting Christianity comes in, because there's this character, this sort of very sideline character called Grail, who his daughter was one of the ones sacrificed at some point. And he makes mention to another character like, hey, isn't it weird that when the dragon was killed, that a holy man, a Christian priest, just happened to show up in the village? And another Star Wars connection, the priest is played by Ian McDiarmid, Emperor Palpatine himself. And this priest is, of course, like, oh, yes, God was the reason that the dragon was killed and all this. And again, I was like, oh, this is okay. It's simple. It's a simple piece of commentary and something we've seen play out in other fantasy movies we've covered on this show, like Excalibur.
Right.
Okay, this is going to be about Christianity supplanting older pagan religions.
Right. It's sort of about the ushering out of the old gods and in with the new.
Which, again, is also very prevalent in something like Game of Thrones.
And also in Lord of the Rings, it talks about the start of a new age, and this is the age of men, and the sort of mystical beings like the elves are going to leave Middle-earth to go elsewhere. So
right.
Talks about sort of shifts in mythology, sort of tectonic shifts, and how the dynamics of culture work in these fantasy places. It's an interesting idea. They don't do a whole lot with it here, but it's interesting that it is there. For some reason, Galen is locked up. Like, he has the conversation with the king, and he gets thrown in prison for, I don't know, talking back to the king or something. Seems like something this king would do.
I can't remember.
But down in the dungeon, she's the princess, the king's daughter, is talking to Galen, and Galen tells her that, in fact, her father has been excluding her from the lottery. And she is upset about this because she is very much into social justice and equality. And she's like, well, that's not fucking fair at all. There is a big chunk here of the movie. There's just like plot shuffling going on. Not a whole lot happens in terms of character. Galen escapes from the dungeon. The dragon reemerges because the rock slide that Galen used to trap it was just bullshit. And the king reinstates the lottery.
Well, but before that, we got to talk about one of my favorite shots in the movie, which is when the dragon reemerges. Ian McDiarmid is, there at the mouth of his cave and is saying, like, foul beast.
Oh, he is roasted so perfectly.
It's so, well, one of my favorite shots is, this is another way that they hide the dragon. There's a shot from behind Ian McDiarmid who's kneeling on the ground, and as he rises up, they frame it so he is masking the dragon's face.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, it's so well composed. Yep.
It's so good. I love that shot. It's almost better than when we actually see the dragon later. I'm just like, oh, this, I feel in that position. And then his roasting.
Mm-hmm. No, it's absolute chef kiss. Like the editing is also very good. Like rhythmically, all of these things happening, and that blast, that huge jet of fire down at his character, and the sort of you see, I think, a dummy's head get burned. Like it burns all the hair off a dummy's head, and then it cuts away as a great scene transition. So it's all kind of working on a surface level at this point. Like technically, not much going on here that I have a problem with.
We'll get there. So yes, then when the dragon's back, the king reinstates the lottery, and he has a big lottery scene, and the name that he draws out is Princess Elspeth. Well, of course
he's immediately like, no, that is an error. Please, please, we will discard this tile.
I should say somebody else draws it out and reads the name. He's like, no, they misread the name. We're gonna discard this one, only to find out all the tokens have been changed to Princess Elspeth, and Princess Elspeth grabs the mic and just says, hey, look, I know that I've been excluded from this, and that's bullshit, so I'm going to sacrifice myself.
Then she tears a picture of the Pope in half on live television.
Right. She says George Bush hates black people.
Yeah, exactly.
So anyways.
She rips Janet Jackson's bra off. So everybody, they shuffle her off stage very, very quickly. But, yes, she does eventually end up on the sacrificial altar in front of the dragon's lair.
And it's unfortunate because from a plotting perspective and drama, just the drama of this movie, it all pretty much works, but Princess Elspeth is not a character.
No, the fact that she is into like social justice and equality, like pretty obviously is an interesting thing, but they never really give her much else to do.
Well, just nobody gets developed properly enough for them to feel, nobody's motivations feel earned at all, except maybe the dragons.
Yeah, that's true. But this is all sort of classic fairy tale storytelling. You know, a king is arrogant, the princess is into justice, you know, the young wizard is cocky.
Right. Well,
and you really don't need a whole lot more explanation than that. Like that's just classic sort of fairy tale or mythological storytelling.
Well, yeah, I think I said to you during my screening that this is the most storybook 101 kind of fantasy fairy tale type of storytelling, but they're trying to do that with this grounded approach. And like I said, dramatically, plotting wise, those things all work, but then we don't really get the kind of character development that I think this kind of story needs. And then trying to seem like the movie is about things like class commentary or the rise of Christianity. They never really feel like the movie actually is about those things.
Right. It ultimately doesn't resolve those things in the end. Like, it's really only concerned with resolving the main romance and, you know, making sure that these two characters end up together in a very storybook sort of way. But we never really get much of an indication that the issues of inequality are ever really addressed through this. They're just something that exists in the world, and they don't really make any sort of change necessarily. And then this sort of rise of Christianity is just sort of backdrop here. Like, that, does that really go anywhere after the dragon kills Ian McDiarmid's character? I'm not sure. All I hear though with Ian McDiarmid is when he says the word power, and I'm like, there's Palpatine.
There's a couple scenes of just this Grail character and people in the village starting to like get baptized and but it never feels a part of the movie. It feels like it's another movie that's going on to the side of this movie.
Yeah, the characters never sit around and talk about what it actually means that things are moving and happening. And then, like, I get that characters don't necessarily have to sit around and talk about something for it to be present in the subtext of the film, or if to actually mean anything at all. Like, it can only be portrayed through imagery. But ultimately, I don't understand thematically quite, you know, what it's supposed to deliver, and that's okay. I mean, this is not a food for thought kind of movie. It is a popcorn for food sort of movie.
Well, and talking about that, let's get to the meat of this entree, and that is Galen going into the cave to fight Vermithrax.
Right. He needs a particular weapon to do that. The weapon itself is where the movie gets its title.
Right. It's a super awesome mega spear that Valerian's dad made. And it's so awesome it can cut through anything.
Yeah, it can shave a horseshoe.
Right. So Galen is going to go and kill Valerian. But first, Tyrion has to show up and get stabbed real quick.
Yeah. There is a fight with Tyrion the asshole, the head evil wig wearer. He is back. And Galen manages to stab him through the big wooden stake that they were using to tie virgins to. So he impales the guy through the stake.
Which, of course, I do love that Galen frees Princess Elspeth. He's like, hey, I'm here to kill the dragon. And she's like, no, I have to be sacrificed.
Yeah. She's really, really intent on being a martyr for social justice. It's again, a really interesting idea, but it doesn't really give us a whole lot of development or sort of background on why she is this way or how she became to be this way.
But who cares? Because once we get into that cave, the magic happens.
Okay.
Let's stick with Princess Elspeth first, because this is a surprise moment. Turns out Vermithrax had babies.
Yes. So after Princess Elspeth is cut away from the stake and is free, she stumbles away and falls into a pit of baby dragons, who then proceed to eat her alive.
Eat the fuck out of her.
They munch.
I was genuinely shocked when this moment happened, because not only like, oh, the princess is going to die, but these little baby dragons, which I love. I adore these baby dragons.
Oh, they're great animatronics and puppets, and like the sculpt is so immediately memorable. They look like little bulldogs.
Yeah, that's actually good. But also, I admit a bias here. This is just my critters love type moment where these little creatures are chomping down on a person and she is dead. And we see just chunks of her being bitten out to the point where one of the baby dragons bites her foot off and has it in its mouth with a bunch of viscera dangling off the stump. It's genuinely gross.
Yeah. Need we remind you, this is actually a Disney Paramount co-production.
We didn't even say this is a Disney movie.
It's technically a live action Disney film. It was one of their few co-productions with Paramount. It was sort of an odd, an odd thing that happened with that. But
well, this is the period where they, they're potentially facing bankruptcy.
Is this post Black Hole? This is 1981.
Mm-hmm.
Black Hole was what, 1979?
Yeah, and this is, I think Tron is 82.
Yeah, you're right.
Like, and this is really a period of Disney kind of going through an identity crisis of figuring out what are we? Like, what are we trying to make? Are we trying to evolve past our kind of, classic image and really be a movie studio that's going to go up against the kind of stuff that Fox is making? And I think this was their attempt. It's like, hey, this could potentially be a Star Wars type thing for us. Obviously that didn't work out, but it is so crazy to see this really surprisingly gory moment in what is branded a Disney movie.
Yeah, I would agree. My surprise, even though I'd seen this movie a couple times and I had remembered like, oh yeah, there's this surprisingly nasty scene. I had forgotten how nasty it was. Like Galen stumbles across this horrific scene of the poor princess being eaten and munched by these baby dragons. And then he proceeds to murderize all of the baby dragons. I mean, there are gnarly close-ups of him stabbing them, hacking off heads, like severed dragon heads rolling around. It is, again, a total mystery to me why they wanted to put Peter MacNicol in this role.
Right. Well, even Peter MacNicol can't take away from the majesty of this entire sequence, which we'll get to, should be the climax of the movie.
Yeah, but it's like him starring in like a Frank Frazetta panel for like a minute. It's like, whoa, okay.
It is bizarre, but there's this giant lake of fire inside the cave, and there is this absolutely stunning tracking shot that goes across the lake of fire as fire is erupting just as the camera passes by. It's so cool.
Yeah, need we remind you that they did these things for real back then?
Yes.
This set is unfucking believable. Unbelievable.
It really took my breath away. And I was fine with the movie for the most part. I was like, yeah, this is good enough. And there's stuff here, but I don't know. It's just not clicking. And then this sequence happens. And I was like, I get it. I get why people have a fondness for this movie, because this entire sequence is such a winner. And it's finally when we get the full reveal of Vermithrax. We also get some wonderful Phil Tippett go motion, which, is just beautiful to look at.
Yeah, once the movie actually decides to sort of move the camera back and show the dragon's full body in the frame, it's replaced by a stop motion animated puppet who was animated by Phil Tippett's effects team. And Phil Tippett's particular brand of stop motion, he called it go motion. And the big difference is that he tried to eliminate that sort of choppy, jumpy feel between capturing still frames by introducing techniques of artificially creating motion blur so that things moved realistically. And they did an incredible job. There is one shot of the dragon after it finds out that its babies are all dead. It is like stomping around this cave. And the go motion shot is actually composited into another shot that then tilts up and shows Galen in a small little alcove or a little cavern up above. It's just so super impressive how they managed to marry a lot of these shots together in this cave sequence. There's stuff later on that just doesn't quite work as well. We'll get there. But this cave sequence is really the centerpiece of the film. And if the film ended here, like if this was the climactic sequence, I think I would have been happier with the movie.
Agreed. I did want to say, since I mentioned it, Vermithrax surprising us by showing that Vermithrax has babies, and then having a scene where Vermithrax does, finds the dead baby and pushes its body with its snout, and then we hear it roaring off screen in anger. It again, I was like, holy shit, this dragon is a character.
It is a character. Yeah, it actually it doesn't emote on screen, but they sell it well enough to make it feel like the dragon is emoting.
Yeah, I totally. So yes, Galen, gets to ride rodeo on the back of a dragon's neck and try and stab it, but doesn't kill it. But then this feels like the climax of the movie, but then the movie kind of goes into a weird, almost rushed fourth act, which feels so bizarre, like a second climax.
Yeah, which I mean, I'm sure Sting would be fine with in his tantric ways, but yeah, there is sort of a bit of a fourth act here where Galen manages to escape the Dragonslayer by the skin of his teeth, and eventually meets up again with Valerian, and I forget exactly how it all goes down, but they manage to resurrect Ulrich, the formerly deceased sorcerer known as Ulrich. He is able to come back in a weird costume.
The whole time, Galen has been carrying this bag of ashes, which are Ulrich's ashes after they, burn him on a pyre after he's killed in the beginning of the movie. And he's been carrying these ashes this whole time. And then he realizes, like, oh yeah, this cryptic stuff that I was told earlier meant for me to throw his ashes into the lake of fire, which would resurrect him, because Ulrich knew he couldn't make the journey to kill the dragon himself. So this was the only way he could do it. So yeah, he throws his ashes into the lake of fire. Ulrich comes out, and this is when the movie's effects take a turn.
They do. There is a decision here in this sort of fourth act to change locations. Instead of going from these enclosed locations that are very sort of tactile and, they have these real sets that the actors are on, and instead of being able to have the dragon sort of share physical space with the performers, they decided to sort of take this climax to the mountaintops where the dragon would be flying around. So the dragon is not really represented by a practical element that is in the frame with the characters. It's all a puppet shot against a background for compositing, basically. And because this is 1981 compositing, and it's not, I don't think ILM did this movie. I might be wrong. The optical work is not all that great. There's a wide shot of the dragon where you can literally see the remnants of the mat around the dragon as it flies around. Like the rectangular shape of the original shot is still in the frame. It's against a big sky. And it's for 1981, it's not atrocious, but it really is a fart in the face of just how good the effects have been in the rest of the movie. Well,
here's the thing, and I'm not going to get too technical about this, but when you're doing compositing back in the old days, you were pretty much trading off opacity, and so certain things would kind of look more transparent the more effect that you had to do. And there's a shot where literally the mountainscape that is in the background of characters can be seen through the characters in the frame.
Yeah, it's it looks like hastily done work. I don't know why anyone would think that was super acceptable. Maybe that was just as good as they could get it. And at the time, these were optical processes, meaning that they had to be essentially rephotographed. So you'll often notice a huge difference in quality between a shot that has an optical effect in it and then a shot that doesn't have an optical effect in it, because it essentially had to be rephotographed. There's a generational loss of quality every time.
Right.
And so you see that kind of stuff a lot in this fourth act. And I think it stands out particularly poorly because the movie is in dire need of restoration. This 1080p master that I rented from iTunes, it's not in good shape, dude. The movie needs some work. I think the movie needs a little love, and I think it deserves that love. Like, it deserves a good Blu-ray.
I mean, it certainly has its cult following, but this ending in which, I mean, we do get Ulrich exploding to kill the dragon.
Oh, yeah. The dragon picks Ulrich up, and then the little amulet that the young sorcerer Galen has been carrying around. I think they smash the amulet or they burn it, and then Ulrich explodes like a giant grenade, killing the dragon. And the timing of this, like this is one section where the editing doesn't quite work as well. The timing of it is such that the exploding wizard doesn't feel like this huge cathartic, oh my God, the wizard exploded. It is fucking hilarious.
It's funny.
It's just like, oh, make it explode. Boom. The fucking wizard explodes like a bomb.
Yeah, it's not great. I mean, thankfully, after that, we do get to see the exploded carcass of Vermithrax, which is a big practical, prop.
It's not just a big practical prop. They dumped huge bags of real guts into this thing and it's just strewn in a field somewhere. So this big dragon covered in real guts that they got from some butcher shop, or probably, it looks like 6 butcher shops worth of guts, frankly. It is real funny. There's like 6 livers hanging out of its face. Oh, gotta love it. It's probably stunk to high heaven.
It's gnarly and wonderful. And then, of course, the king shows up and just puts his sword on the dragon. Everybody's like, all hail the king, the Dragonslayer.
Look what I did.
And there, there's off on the ridge somewhere, the character Grail has now assumed the mantle of Christian priest. Is like, oh, thanks be to God for killing the dragon. And Galen and Valerian are like, fuck this shit. Let's just go somewhere. And then the movie ends.
Yeah, they fuck off. They have their little romance. And that is Dragonslayer. We have neglected to mention the name of the writer and the director. This is written and directed by a guy named Matthew Robbins. His partner at the time, Hal Barwood, also has a writing credit on the film. And you might recognize the name Matthew Robbins if you're familiar with Guillermo del Toro's output in recent years. Matthew Robbins worked with del Toro on Mimic and Don't Be Afraid of the Dark and Crimson Peak, and is also working on him with his new Pinocchio adaptation. He also worked with George Lucas on the original THX 1138 short. He worked with Spielberg on Sugarland Express and Closer Encounters of the Third Kind. So the dude has quite a bit of pedigree. He's not a great director. I mean, his first movie was Corvette Summer, which was the movie that Mark Hamill did right after Star Wars. It's not a very good movie.
Yeah. Well, I feel that Dragonslayer was definitely an attempt for Robbins to put himself in the caliber of the people that he was working with, as a Spielberg, as a Lucas. But I don't know, kind of coming around to final summations, Dragonslayer is the perfect example of a movie that I want to love. Like, there's so much about it that I feel it either it gets it right, or if it doesn't get it right, the ambition and the intention is right. And a lot of the movie I really like there wasn't a ton, I think, that we had to say negatively.
No.
But I think the core thing is that there's nobody in this story that I ever cared about.
Yeah, the characters aren't really designed to be people you fall in love with, which is a bummer, because I would love to actually love these characters. If the characters were at all likable or lovable, I think there would be some meat to grab onto, like something really memorable in this movie. You look at a movie like The Princess Bride, which is another high fantasy film. Of course, there's a framing device that may change that genre a little bit if you want to get real nerdy about it. But, that The Princess Bride is full of characters you love. And it has, I think, some really impressive genre effects stuff going on as well. The giant rats and the screeching eels and, all that sort of stuff. But this, nobody you really want to hang out with. And of course it's, I think an odd idea to say, oh, the characters aren't likable. I don't really find them, that they have to be likable, but there's really nobody I find that's all that relatable, which is maybe part and parcel with this sort of mythic storytelling.
Well, that's why I don't say I need characters I like. I need characters I care about.
Okay.
And
I think that's kind of splitting hairs a little bit.
Well, no, because I think I can care about characters that I dislike or care about characters that I disagree with. Caring really comes around to making the emotional stakes of characters and their actions feel as if they click with you as a viewer.
Yeah, maybe I think it comes down for me, like, am I invested in this character's future?
Right. And
for good or ill.
And no, like,
No.
I mean, maybe if the movie was using its storybook framework to get into these deeper ideas that it presents and be like, okay, cool, this is a neat little subversion of this kind of very basic storybook tale, but it never services those kind of headier ideas, and it never gave us anybody that I really thought was worth a damn.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, there are interesting ideas here. The cocky young wizard, why is he cocky? It's all because wizarding is part showmanship, and that is an interesting idea. That is just kind of decoration in the movie. You know, the idea that Valerian had to hide as a young woman and as a boy, like, oh, that's really interesting. I'd love to know more about her character and the sort of effects this has had on her. Like, this is great. I don't want her to turn into the storybook love interest, but unfortunately she does. Yeah, there's plenty of potential here. None of it is really picked up on. As a result, the movie is not terribly long. It is 100 minutes. Runs at a pretty fast clip.
Yeah, but above all, the dragon. I mean, the dragon is almost reason enough to recommend the movie. The way it is shot and framed and introduced and hinted at.
I think it's absolutely reason enough to recommend the movie. If you want to see one of the best dragons in cinema in the 20th century, you watch Dragonslayer.
Well, I think that's a good note to go out on. So let's move on to the shelf, where we pick a movie to act as a good pairing or substitute for our main topic. And as always, we would love if you, loyal listener, would go to GenreVision.com and comment on this post for the episode with your own shelf picks. Travis, what are you going to pull off the shelf?
This is a really obscure pick. I've actually not seen this, so I'm actually recommending this as a shelf pick more to me than anybody else. It's a movie called 1 Million BC. It was released in 1940. It's a Hal Roach movie. And he directed it with his son, Hal Roach Jr. It's got Lon Chaney Jr. in it, and it's basically about a whole bunch of cave people who encounter a whole bunch of dinosaurs. And how are the dinosaurs portrayed in the film? Well, it's not like stop motion. They actually managed to dress up an American alligator by putting a big fan on its back, and then they made it fight like a monitor lizard, like a real big lizard. And they just shot that on miniature sets as the effects for this. It's like, it's insanity. A bunch of this movie has been turned into stock footage. And so you've seen bits and pieces of this movie, I almost guarantee it, in other things. So this footage has shown up in, let's see, Valley of the Dragons, Lost Planet from 1953, Atom Man versus Superman, which is one of the 1950 Superman serials. It's shown up all over the place. It's even remade in 1966 by Hammer Films, I think.
What's the name? Because I know there's 1 million years BC.
Yeah,
the Raquel Welch movie.
Yeah, that's a remake of 1 million BC.
Okay.
So, if you really want to see how far we've come from 1940 to 1981 in terms of effects, like we didn't have to make alligators fight lizards on screen for our pleasure anymore. So. I think that's a pretty big step forward. Anyway, what are you pulling off the shelf this week?
Well, if you want another grounded take on sort of a medieval fantasy riff that also has a pretty blatant connection to Game of Thrones, you should check out the movie Black Death. This does not take place in a fantasy world. This does take place in actual historical period, but it is about a group of knights who go to a village to investigate. That I think at first that they are investigating to see if there is an outbreak of the plague, but then there is this village where nobody has become infected, and it's possible that something supernatural is going on. It's funny that you're recommending a movie you haven't seen. I'm recommending a movie that I'm not exactly crazy about.
I didn't like it. I mean, I've seen it once, and I wasn't at all crazy about it.
I again, it's another one of those movies where I appreciate the approach to it. I appreciate what they're trying to do with this kind of supernatural riff on a medieval setting. You know, and we've covered movies like this on the show before, like The 13th Warrior. And, you know, Sean Bean is in it. And yes, Sean Bean does get executed in particularly gory fashion. There's some good gore in the movie. Eddie Redmayne is in this, doing an Eddie Redmayne performance. So
Yeah, this was one of the first movies I ever saw Eddie Redmayne in.
it was probably the first movie I ever saw him in.
Okay.
Possibly. So, but I think that if you like that kind of down and dirty, gritty approach to medieval fantasy, Black Death is probably one that will scratch that itch. It's not necessarily one of the best, but it feels like a very grown up, serious face version of something like Dragonslayer. So, Black Death. All right, let's do some currently consuming.
Num 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 num.
Travis, what's been on your plate recently?
I'm only going to talk about one thing this week. Not sure how long we'll talk about it because we could end up talking about this like forever. This is one of the things that you and I and our friend Danielle Ryan, hi Danny, we just love talking about this. I watched a whole bunch of Jackass over the last week. I've never really seen the Jackass TV show aside from just clips, but the 3 Jackass movies, I love them to death, particularly the second and the third one. And I think after watching them again, I think the third one, Jackass 3D, is my clear favorite now. I didn't expect it to hold up as well, but I think by the time they came around to this, they really knew how to select the right stunts. Like every single one has some sort of winning aspect to it.
I mean, yeah, like you said, we can't talk about it too much because we could just be here forever. But no, Jackass 3D, I mean, it kind of has the benefit of just being made the latest, so the technology to actually make the movie is the best it ever was for this franchise.
Oh yeah, it definitely had the biggest budget of the 3 for sure, and it looks real good. But you know, it's largely shot in natural light, sort of verite style as much as it can be. But you know, the cameras are nice, and for some really fun gag shots, they actually broke out the 3D cameras and did some really, really cleverly conceived 3D gags. Like it's definitely one of the best 3D films of that trend in time in the late aughts, like from say 2008 to 2014, when 3D movies sort of ruled the box office.
I mean, more so than 3D, I think their best technical aspect is the Phantom Cam.
Yeah, the slow-mo stuff, especially like the dildo flying across the landscapes. That stuff is real good. Where they load the dildo into the air cannon and they shoot it across all the miniatures. That's just classic shit. When they hit Aaron McGay in the face with that fish, that's an incredible slow-mo shot.
All the Rockies.
The Rockies are pretty good, but that opening sequence of Jackass 3 where they're doing all of the slow-mo stunts on the soundstage, I could watch a whole fucking movie of that.
It's beautiful. Yeah.
That is beyond funny. I love that shit. But I think my favorite thing about this third movie on, latest watch is how well scene transitions work. And one of the reasons they work so well is that the gags and the stunts are so well conceived that every time they fade up on a new one, they kind of choose the perfect frame for it every time. My favorite one, I think, is The Invisible Man, where they put this painted background that has a sky and a grass and a tree and a rainbow, very simple. But they've painted Johnny Knoxville to look like a part of this painted background, and he sort of disappears into it. And for them to fade up on that, and then as soon as they cut to a wider shot or they zoom out a little bit, you start to understand the context of what he's doing there and why he's there. It's just so good and so funny every time they cut to a new gag, and it's like, oh man, they perfectly demonstrated how this is supposed to work.
Yeah, like you said, we could probably talk about these movies for 2 episodes worth.
Maybe one day we will actually sit down with our friend Danielle, who's really in love with the Jackass movies too, and we'll just sort of put all our love out there about them. But that's all I have to say about Jackass 3D right now. What, sir, have you been currently consuming?
Well, the new season of Black Mirror is upon us.
Oh wow! Sound the trumpets. Drew sounds real excited.
Well, I think we should say we have been pretty focused on Black Mirror in the past. We did a whole episode on the most season 4, the last season.
Yep, we did an episode of encompassing seasons 1 through 3, and then we did an episode all on season 4 of Black Mirror. And now the new season is upon us.
And we will not be doing an episode on Black Mirror season 5. Not necessarily because of its quality or anything, but after the interactive, choose your own adventure Bandersnatch movie, which I just did not enjoy on any level.
No, I played through it once and was pretty disappointed.
This season, they've gone back to the classic, just 3 episodes like they used to, I think, in the first 2 series. And I don't know. I'm feeling burnt out, and you even said that to me too. I think you are burnt out because you've kind of gotten to a place where you don't really know what else there is to say or explore, really.
No,
this particular anthology concept.
They keep doing fucking episodes where somebody puts a little dot on their temple and they go into virtual reality and something weird happens every fucking time. Let's widen our horizons a little bit. Like they did that last season. By widening the horizon stylistically, like that David Slade episode with the mechanical hound thing, like that was super simple, but in many ways like one of the more effective episodes in terms of like artistic execution that the show's ever seen.
No, agreed. And this season I think it's trying to get back to basics. So the directorial flair really isn't there. The first 2 episodes I kind of shrugged at. The last episode, which features Miley Cyrus in one of the starring roles, that was pretty much my favorite. It's also maybe the lightest episode of the entire series. And I know people will be like, oh, San Junipero. I'm like, San Junipero has so much weight behind it. Just because it's not a downer episode, as, the mold of the show became known for, it doesn't mean it's light. This episode with Miley Cyrus, which I believe is called, oh God, what is it now that I have to actually say it?
He doesn't have to believe anything, folks. He's got to look it up.
Which is called Rachel, Jack, and Ashley 2, TOO.
Rachel, Jack, and Ashley 2, the sequel.
Well, yes.
Jack Harder.
Number TOO. Yeah, I liked this one. Its commentary is light enough, and it's like, okay, they're doing it, and it's not like the second episode of season 5 is one of the most what if phones but too much episodes of the entire run of Black Mirror.
Yeah,
and of course it's about a troubled, angry white guy, so people are loving it. And this third one, where it's mostly it's the main characters are younger women. Miley Cyrus is playing a pretty clear analogous role to her real life self during her Hannah Montana days, I would assume. But also Angourie Rice, who people will remember from The Nice Guys, is in that.
Oh yeah, and Spider-Man Homecoming.
Yeah, she's really good.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah, it's light and it's kind of silly and maybe the most comedic, like outright comedic episode that they've ever done, but it still has some good weight. It still has some fun stuff. And Miley Cyrus covers a 9 Inch Nails song at the end.
Fun. Which one?
Hole in Your Head.
Head Like a Hole, you mean?
Head Like a Hole, I'm sorry. It's late. I'm extremely tired.
That classic 9 Inch Nails tune, Hole in Your Head.
Put a hole in my head because I'm done.
Okay, Trent.
Yeah, right. You ever seen the Whitest Kids You Know sketch with Trent Reznor? Not with, but as one of them playing Trent Reznor.
I don't think I've seen that, no.
Oh, all right. You can cut all this out. It doesn't matter, but you should look that up.
Okay.
But yeah, season 5 of Black Mirror, it's fine. If you're on the Black Mirror train, you're probably going to like this, but I don't know. I think this is my last season with it. I'm really kind of done. And I really think I think it's going to look back and say, like, yeah, the show peaked. I mean, between USS Callister and San Junipero in the same season, in season 4, those feel like all-timers.
They certainly do. I just don't understand why the show continues to exist now that the world has become a greater farce than any sort of satire could let it be, particularly when it comes to like the world of technology and how it plays with social interaction and politics. Like, we have become the parody in a lot of ways. Like, I don't know how parody can recover. I don't know how satire can actually recover. We've turned to Dadaism and absurdism in place of satire to actually try to make sense of how fucking nutty things are right now. I don't know if Black Mirror really has a place on my shelf anymore. And I don't know. I almost want to say no fault of the shows, but I think The show could have done more to evolve instead of just being what people expected, like continuing to deliver on the same things over and over. It's pretty clear that Charlie Brooker just has like 5 or 6 things that he wants to keep talking about. It's like, come on, Charlie.
Well, and that was evident in season 4 when they brought in more writers. There were different writers. Season 5, Charlie Brooker has the sole writing credit on all 3 episodes. And
yeah, it's kind of a bummer. I think I had heard, I forget who it was maybe Joe Swanberg or maybe one of the Duplass brothers, one of these mumblecore guys that had been given sort of anthology stuff to do online. He was talking about how the Netflix model doesn't really do well with anthology stuff because they don't really have enough hooks to keep people watching. There's really not enough narrative continuity to keep people hooked and to binge. So people don't watch, or they don't keep watching, which is what Netflix doesn't want. They want you to binge watch the whole motherfucker in a day.
Well, on that uplifting note, I think that's going to wrap it up. Next week, we'll be back with a Versus episode in celebration of kind of 2 toy movies coming out, Toy Story 4 and the new remake of Child's Play. We're going to be doing a Versus episode with Bride of Chucky versus Pin, which is also known as Pin, a Plastic Nightmare, which is a movie probably a lot of you haven't seen, and I hope after next week you will have. So join us next week for that. As always, we want to thank you so much for listening. I'm Drew Deach.
I'm Travis Newton.
And we'll see you next week.
Right here on GenreVision, Killer Doll Edition.